What a year, eh? 2025. I must admit, it's not been the most fun year of my career, I'll be honest.
We had a number of claims that ransomware was AI enabled that had to be retracted afterwards.
Are you seeing a lot of belligerence towards security, or is it just the same old, yeah, okay?
Companies do not want security. They want the appearance of security.
There are meant to be provisos like, we have content moderators. There won't be anything terribly untoward. But I'm waiting for those chat histories to be used to blackmail. Isn't that cheery?
I am getting very, very sick and tired of having to justify protecting an organisation from, in essence, itself and its own ignorance.
It is inescapable for most people in your roles that burnout, you will be affected by burnout.
That's why people get stressed and they are obviously overruled in decision making, but then blamed when these decisions come back to bite in their behind.
So the emphasis is still on don't let your problems affect us, even though the systemic issues are what are causing the problems.
I'm bored with that story. There is an air accident investigation branch, there is a marine accident investigation branch, and they log all of the incidents in a certain way so you fully understand all of the things that happened leading up to that. Is there not a case for something like that in cybersecurity?
The sad reality is that for 99% of security people, they're not fixing planes. People don't die if you get breached. It's a business problem like shoplifting.
Most organizations, they're not hiring tier 1 SOC analysts. That's all been done by AI.
I'm worried whether or not in about 10 years' time we're going to have the next generation of InfoSec people. You're not going to have the youngsters. They're not going to have gotten in.
My way of seeing the world is that work is everything, and things, whether it's family, exercise, friends, all of that fits in around work. And I had a dawning realisation that if I flip the script and work fits in around that, then maybe life would be less stressful and I'd be more relaxed.
I think people need to stop over-identifying security as the most important thing in the world, because it's not.
Hello and welcome to the Christmassy edition of the Razorwire podcast. I have a wonderful group of people, and possibly one latecomer, we're not too sure yet, who have come together for us to sit and discuss the past, the present, and the future of cybersecurity in a very kind of Ebenezer Scrooge kind of way, with me obviously being Ebenezer because I hate Christmas as a general rule. Sorry, kids, but I do. So let's introduce the guest that I have today. Who wants to go? Should we go from the top and along? Eve, Oliver, Marius, then Bec.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, my name's Eve. I work as a therapist, from sports psychology over here to clinical traumatology over here. So I'm interested in power, potential, and performance, and the stuff that gets in the way, like the misuse and abuse of power and the wear and tear, or in this good company, the malwear and tear of the work that we do, including things like burnout, moral distress, and indirect trauma.
My name's Oliver. I'm a recovering industry analyst. I used to work for Gartner. I have my own advisory firm called the Futurist. And I also have a startup called Anu AI. We have a community edition. It's free. If you're into foresight work, you want to do some predictions, check it out.
So guys, my name is Marius. I'm a CISO at FinTech by day, a vCISO business owner by night. I run Cyber Diaries podcast, and I'm a board advisor at a number of cybersecurity vendors.
And I'm Bec McKeown. I'm a chartered psychologist and I specialise in human performance under pressure. So hence my work in cybersecurity with crisis response teams. I've got a background working with defence industry. So people under pressure is something that I'm very used to dealing with.
Welcome all, and welcome to the Christmas edition of Razorwire. So bearing in mind, I live in Tunbridge Wells, and at the time of this recording, water is very, very hard to find, especially if you want to drink it. So I brought myself a beer. This is about as Christmassy as I get, since I can't drink anything else. So Merry Christmas, everybody. Thank you for coming along. Coffee
Merry
drinkers,
Christmas.
tea drinkers.
Oh, coffee. No judgment there, Jim.
Absolutely none. This is all I can drink. I can't even make myself a cup of tea without finding some water somewhere in the town, of which there is none. So, it's very disappointing. So let's see how this podcast goes over the next sort of hour or so, because I could start slurring my words if I drink enough. But what a year, eh? 2025. I must admit, it's not been the most fun year of my career, I'll be honest, with a litany of fun and frolics that have occurred. But I think we've seen some pretty significant shifts in cybersecurity. I think we've seen some significant breaches in cybersecurity. And I think we've seen quite a lot of awareness in cybersecurity around kind of like the stress that people are under in this space. It's been some of our best content that has had the most views, the whole sort of burnout side of things. And I've had quite a few DMs as well. I mean, don't get me wrong, all the other wonderful guests we've had have done some brilliant content. But it is kind of indicative when you look at what people are watching on the channel and you see the burnout side of things and the stress side of things being so prominent. And I think with all of the breaches that we've seen and the changes that we've seen, we've had obviously DORA, we've got NIS2 incoming, we've got all kinds of legislation, we've got AI that I know Oliver loves talking about, and all the fear mongering that's going on with that. And to be honest, we are starting to see the initial job losses in that space as well in certain areas where people are claiming to be moving stuff over to AI. So I think 2025 has definitely been an interesting year. I mean, what do you guys think? Oliver, you're the ex-analyst. What's your view?
I'd actually prepared for this. I had to laugh because the instructions said a light-hearted review of 2025. Right? Do you know the movie Men in Tights, Robin Hood parody, where he has to deliver bad news in a good way?
Oh, yes. Are you going to do
That's
that?
what I was.
That would be good.
Yeah, I really like the clown-grade threat intelligence we had in 2025. We had a number of claims that ransomware was AI-enabled that had to be retracted afterwards. MIT Sloan is the most well-known one. We've had Anthropic claiming that nation-state actors used their service for some bizarre, unknown reason. So I actually think that there's a lot of marketing-driven threat intelligence in the moment around AI. So that was my takeaway, the fact that actually, that actually hasn't materialized in the way that people thought. But the good news out of all of this is that irrespective of AI, on the attack or the defender side, less people paid ransomware.
Really?
So I thought that was, that's so there's a company which does research into this every year, Coveware, and in the last quarter it was only 23% of ransomware victims paid, compared to down 66% from Q2. And to me, there's resilience there. It shows people aren't relying on shiny toys or gimmicks. They're relying on disaster recovery and cyber hygiene because they're getting breached, but they're not paying the ransom. That's a positive take. Yeah.
That is positive because that should reduce it. Marius, what are you seeing out of 2025? Is it similar to Oliver? And then we'll move over to the wonders of stress and burnout. And
I think we still seem to be kind of, I think in a way behind the curve of. I think obviously there's new talent coming into the industry, but I think people been sold a lie that new shiny Blinker 3000 is going to solve all of our problems, and we forgetting doing the basics is still important. As you mentioned, burnout is still, I think, the main theme. Like just looking on LinkedIn, my post about CISO resignation letter is currently ticking over 300,000 impressions. So obviously seems to be quite a common theme of people, how the way that people feel, how they've been given a ton of accountability with no support and budget, and people are finding it tough. I think the problem what I see as well is, in a way, it's playing out this year that cybersecurity importance in the boardroom is kind of falling because regulatory implications on big incidents seems to become negated. We see people negotiating fines from 30 to 14 million, and feels like all of a sudden we're thinking, if the incident happens, it's not so bad. Why would we invest in cybersecurity? So I don't know if there is an easy way to solve this. We seem to need to have a better way of understanding what resilience means and how, we need to communicate and also tell the cybersecurity sort of return on investment and value that we provide to the business. And then one thing which I want to touch on, I do a lot of TikTok and other media about, a lot of people who are coming into in this industry been sold the shiny lie of boot camp certificates, and degrees, and then all of a sudden you're going to get this job. But I always talk about, there's no replacement for skills, and competing, just applying for jobs is not going to help you. You need to network, go to events, meet people, and build hands-on skills, because that's the way you're going to differentiate yourself. But people seem to have, it always seems like it's the reliance of someone else to give you the whole path into cybersecurity instead of me actually doing the research. People always ask questions, how do I get into cybersecurity? But cybersecurity is vast. What do you want to do? You want to be SOC analyst, GRC analyst, or an engineer? That's completely different paths that I would prescribe to you. But, it feels like people want everything given on a plate instead of actually doing the work themselves.
I couldn't disagree with any of that, I'll be honest, especially that last bit. People do seem to want it on a plate. I mean, Eve, how are you finding obviously we've mentioned burnout at least 3 times. So it must be pretty important. What are you seeing?
The conversations are still there. There's still a lot of frustration around them. There's still a lot of, yes, we recognize it's a problem, but the factors seem systemic, and they are. And the emphasis is still put on the individual more often than not to, in the better cases, like take care of yourself. But in most of the cases, it's make sure that whatever you're experiencing, the symptoms of your burnout, they do not affect the work. So the emphasis is still on, don't let your problems affect us, even though the systemic issues are what are causing the problems.
Bec.
Isn't that cheery?
Yes, I'm sat there nodding away. I've just pulled out my soapbox. I'm going to leap on it. Burnout is an occupational stressor. The Health and Safety Executive in the UK have guidance on employers' responsibility for stress. But I agree with Eve, it all seems to be very much, it's down to the individual to manage their work at the same time, with no acknowledgement that the organisations, the systems within it are actually part of the problem. And I'm bored with that story. It's time that we stop talking about burnout in that way. It's time we stop wringing our hands over burnout and actually started to move the conversation on, because it's a conversation that's been going on for quite a number of years now, and we don't seem to be shifting the dial at all. And I think that's really kind of what I'm hoping might change.
Do you know, I've been thinking about this. This is a more sort of lighthearted speculation space.
Go for it.
Okay, so hot take time. The legal responsibility that individuals have, I'm going to backtrack, right? Follow the join the dots. So Synovus happens, and I spend some time thinking about Synovus, and it makes me think about the key case with the Doppelmayr attack on the hospital in Dusseldorf, right? Where it was, I think that was the first time that it was involuntary homicide using the but-for clause. Like the patient would still be alive, but for the inactions of the organisation and the member of staff, where there was a delay between, the patch was made to a vulnerability when it became known, but there was a delay, and it was a delay that was questioned, right? Pause on that, right? Pin in that. All the way over here, something excellent that has happened over the last year with content moderators has been that for years running up till now, content moderators who, because of the nature of their work, they see a horrendous amount of horrendous material, right? So the work causes harm. But for years, they've been asking for recognition, support, protection. But the large companies that they've been trying to fight have been using out-of-court settlements and NDAs. But over the last year, a court in Spain, in Barcelona, has said, yes, this work causes this harm. You are being traumatized by the work, right? And they have, the content moderators have their global trade union of content moderators, which has been set up in the last year. Right? This is tremendous, right? So, final dot that I'm going to join here. In 2023 in the UK, you probably heard that there was a head teacher who ended their life because of an Ofsted, or partly because of
Really? I didn't hear
an
that.
Ofsted report. Yeah. Her name was Ruth Perry. And the Ofsted report contributed to the choices that she made. And Ofsted then went through a series of reforms because of this. Okay, so we now have 3 points on this brain map that I'm trying to put together. So if there's this but for, would the patient still be alive but for the inactions of the organisation or this individual member of staff? Where can we bring in a law which is the equivalent of, yes, but for the inescapable effects of the work that the cyber team has to do, that the security team has to do? Because if we can establish that it is inescapable for most people in your roles, that burnout, you will be affected by burnout, because I've not seen any figure for burnout in your profession, which has been under 59%. I think that's the last percentage, ISC2, their latest workforce survey. If it is inescapable, pretty much, that you will be affected by the work in this way, then what legal protection can be granted through that? I could have explained that better, but the 3 points, how does it land?
No, it's good. It lands. And I mean, again, sort of like Marius has spoken about this. Obviously, we've spoken about this. And, Oliver's seen my journey through the last year of cybersecurity and seen me sort of, burning out and getting quite stressed, just running a company, let alone being in a company where you're responsible for security. I mean, over the 30 years I've been in this, I've seen some horrendous stuff. I've seen people doing horrendous stuff to other people. I've seen content you wouldn't believe, that would make your eyes bleed and get you pretty angry. It'd be interesting to see what Marius thinks about this one, actually. We saw kind of a dramatic rise in support for security for a while after COVID, but I have noticed it's starting to drop off a bit now. There's certain areas that still seem pretty buoyant, but I mean, reading about the SolarWinds CISO and how he lost 25 stone and had a heart attack over what was happening to his company, I think it's frightening. Yeah,
I think just what I made point earlier about the CISO resignation letter and the post, and I think we're up to about 300-400 comments in there, and the most common point is that what I called out in the letter is that companies do not want security; they want the appearance of security. What I mean by that, they hire a CISO to be the person who's accountable, the person who's on insurance paper, the person's name who's on client contracts, the person who is a face of the company of doing security, but actually he's not supported in budgetary, team, and any other way, and he's not getting a seat at the decision-making table. So that's why we constantly see that there is a theater of security where we just doing appearances, where that's why people get stressed, and they are obviously all the time are overruled in decision making, but then blamed when these decisions come back to bite in their behind. And that's why I think it's becoming a pretty common practice. And I think nowadays are people even questioning, I don't really want to become a leader. I'm comfortable sitting a step underneath because I get pretty similar benefits without taking the accountability and the risks that come with stepping into the limelight.
I think in 30 years, I mean, I've always considered myself pretty sacrificial as a lamb when it comes to security. I think the difference is now back then, really big breaches would get into the media, but you didn't get that much. It was only the big stuff that happened. Nowadays, we're getting it all the time. What's your analytics saying, Oliver? You're the one that keeps an eye on the industry, and you've even got your own product now that does it.
I'd say that. So I'm like, obviously I don't disagree with anything anyone said, but I think realistically the industry is going exactly the other way. There's a lot of pressure on teams and CISOs to reduce costs, to apply automation, whether it's mature enough or not. At the same time, we look at security budgets, they've gone up a little bit, but not as much as the cost of living and so on. So in real terms, it's probably actually gone flat. When I speak to people in terms of AI, the expectation there is almost more than in some other areas that automation is going to occur very soon, even though it's probably less likely because we have a human adversary who's also using AI. It's not something that it's not a process that we're automating. We're trying to automate keeping somebody out. And I think that's a completely different scenario, more difficult than automating a business process. But that pressure exists. And so in America right now, there are articles pushing for 996 work week, that model that's been banned in China in the tech industry. XAI celebrated just this week one of their colleagues who did a 36-hour marathon working session.
They celebrated that.
They celebrated that. It's articles, you can look it up. Right? If you Google it right now for XAI 36 hours, I guarantee you'll find a bunch of articles. And so you can imagine, and part of the reason is simply because it's part of the zeitgeist in the moment, I'm afraid. So, and I'm always a big fan of what's actually achievable because it's great talking about policy, but for me as an end user, I can't influence policy, at least not in the short term. And you have to think of what's attainable. What I think Bismarck said, politics is the art of the possible, the attainable, the next best. And so I think we have to start thinking about how you're going to deal with this if it is a personal problem on a personal level. Because we can talk about that being externalized to you, but that doesn't help you deal with it. So I'd be more interested in like, okay, so if I can't change jobs, how do I deal with it if I'm caught between basically in this pressure?
Just to add one thing, I think I was in SANS conference on Wednesday, and it was an interesting thing that they've been discussing. And I think in a way we kind of, I think as an industry, in a way we're moving in the wrong direction. So they were talking about what they call now AP teens. So it's the APT groups that are made up of teens, like Scattered Spider and all of that. We as industry, I think, are looking for very intricate solutions to nation-state threats. But APT teens, 99% of their attacks is they get credentials from InfoStealer. They use AI to change their voice to become an 18-year-old girl, and then calling your help desk to change the password. People are pre-programmed to be helpful in those positions. So their attacks are way more likely and successful. And because they want to help a girl who doesn't understand technology, once they get credentials, then obviously they penetrate the organization, ransomware, double extortion. What happened, for example, with Co-op, after 24 hours, Co-op said that data was not stolen. So threat actors went to BBC and showed the evidence, and that becomes a double extortion to make the organization retract this statement and actually, look like silly, but at the same time enforce them paying stuff. But I think, nowadays, we're not necessarily facing sophisticated threats. We're just facing attackers who previously, for example, Russians would never attack themselves. But these guys are predominantly kids who are in UK, Canada, and US, who are native speakers to organizations and can use social engineering very well and know the mannerisms and how companies work. They do enough social engineering to understand, and they can talk their way out in getting credentials and then penetrating organizations.
That's interesting. Blended attacks. I mean, Oliver, you were telling us that some of the companies that you worked for recently, or relatively recently in the last year, you were interviewing and people were using deepfake AI generators, and they were North Korean or something. Do you want to give us a quick overview?
So there was a spate of I mean, not just us, this happened to a lot of companies, that North Korean threat actors were basically targeting jobs. And the reason is twofold. It's foreign currency. And secondly, they're basically insiders and they can deploy ransomware. But that's essentially why they did it. And we went through a series of interviews with different people over LinkedIn. And they got more sophisticated and more sophisticated. In fact, as I mentioned, in the first interview, they'd forgotten to put on the AI mask. And we were sat opposite someone who was obviously North Korean, but was pretending to be from the Czech Republic. And so that was rather strange. So it was rather interesting. But I've spoken to other people, and there was a phase in the summer where they were just very active. In the end, they've actually hired people in the West to do the interview for them. And a couple of people have actually been arrested in the meantime for what's called, insider collusion.
Wow. I mean, social engineering, the age-old attack, the original one, please help me, I need help. And then you go to help somebody and then you get robbed down an alley. Some things never change. And I think it's going to become more important for people to spot that. We've talked before about how, you remember the old kind of like email you used to get, hi, I'm a prince who's been nailed to the back of an elephant for the last 3 years. And I've got 25 billion in, and I just need you to sort of like help me get it out of countries and I'll let you have sort of like half of it kind of thing, where you could spot how bad things were in the language. And then as AI got better and better and better at writing, simple things for you, the language would get better and better. And now we've got people deep faking faces. I mean, I've seen some stuff online, where people have been just testing out that kind of technology. And once you start blending that with, 18-year-old kid asking for help, it can get pretty scary and pretty insidious. I think this is, where Bec and Eve step in, because social engineering has been such a big problem for a long time in a lot of different areas of the world, not just cybersecurity, but we still fall for it. The romance scams, there's another one. They're still big. They're still popular. They still work.
But that's what's interesting what you said about it now, because the 419 Nigerian prince scam, it's pre-internet. They used to send out letters, then it went to fax, and then it went to email. And the bad language is the bad language is part of the con. They're not looking for intelligent people. They're looking for people who will contact them despite the spelling errors. That's part of the pre-qualification.
I mean, I must admit, so I'll hand over, in a second. My own staff at my own company have received like messages purporting to be from me about needing something or so people have had targeted attacks at against Razorwire. And I mean, it's easy to do. I mean, you just look on LinkedIn, you can see who works here and who has worked here. So, it's quite interesting. But I'll hand over. Who was it yourself, Eve, or Bec?
Yeah, I'm just going to be a bridge because I'm interested in Bec's opinion on this. Because when Marius was talking about the help desk, right? And you've got people trained to be helpful. You're there to solve a problem and you're trying to make it as frictionless as possible for the user. There has to be a place where you can do the equivalent of breaking the chain of command, right? You have to be the one who is willing to be unhelpful, who's willing to ask the difficult questions, who's willing to annoy people, who's willing to just add friction into the process. And I think, Bec, the work that the extensive work you've done in terms of airline sort of chain of command comes in here. So you've probably have some insight into like when the juniors can say to the seniors.
It's difficult, and it's actually with MOD that I've done this particular work, because it's all about increasing the ability to perform quickly, efficiently, and effectively, and in the right way. Means that decision has to come down the chain now. So you're trusting people lower down to make decisions and to have that level of responsibility. It's all very well in theory, but in practice it's somewhat more difficult, because that means that the people at the top of the chain have to let go and have to trust further down the chain that they're going to make the right decision. Then there's a whole bunch of where do you set the decision parameters, because nobody wants anybody going off rogue sort of thing. Then you've, at the bottom end of the chain, you've got it conversely, people who are perhaps used to having a set of guidelines all of a sudden can go free range. Mm-hmm. And both of those things cause a lot of discomfort. Mm-hmm. And there are ways of going around that, is sort of expanding each one's role to sort of let go or to take on board, but it has to be a gradual thing. And I'm not sure that the appetite is really there out in industry to want to let people go a little bit free range. I did a talk for an insurance company a little while back and suggested that maybe those people taking those calls could have a little bit more responsibility. Could they, be able to go off piece? They know it met with a wall of blankness because it was such I can't get my head around that idea. And I think that I do wonder whether AI is going to cause people to have to step out of that comfort zone thing. It's a bit like going back to the pandemic. All of a sudden, the comfort zone disappeared and everybody was sort of floundering around. But hey, things happened and some things became better because of it in terms of systems and processes. And I think that, are we going to reach a point whereby things change so quickly that we're going to have no choice but to start doing things in a different way to counteract all of these things that are happening with AI, for example? I think I've just gone off on a little bit there, but
no. Well, I think it's important point you make, and I think what just Eve mentioned. I think it's important to also not only to pause the decision making, but it speaks to the company culture. Your leadership has to empower those underneath to be able to challenge them, because if your boss is always going to tell you off when you challenge them, you're going to stop challenging them. And that's where, the proliferation of these things happen. So leadership has to create a culture where people underneath them are comfortable and are empowered to be able to challenge these questions. Because as you say, for example, I see these scenarios all the time. Somebody joins in. I see them on day one. Somebody joins in my company. Day one, they get a message supposedly from CEO saying, go and buy Amazon gift cards. That's sort of christening coming into the company, testing your, knowledge. But you have to empower these people to not to punish them when they make mistakes, but to encourage them to report when these things happen. Because whenever you start pulling out the stick instead of a carrot, that's where things start going wrong.
Everything
because people will
shuts
start
down.
hiding. Yeah, they'll start hiding their mistakes instead of, showcasing. Because if people make a mistake and you know about it suddenly, you can limit the damage it causes. But when people start hiding things, that's when the real problems occur in organizations.
Yeah, sort of two things popped into my head while you were talking there. MOD had a thing, it was about the Iraq inquiry, the Chilcot report, groupthink, all of that sort of thing happened. So what they did, they introduced what we call a reasonable challenge document. It's one sheet of A4 paper. On the left-hand side, the list of bullet points, how to give a challenge up the hierarchy, ways, phrases that you could use, techniques that you can use to do that. On the opposite side of the paper was how to receive a challenge. And this is typical defence. We have a standard operating procedure and we will implement it and we will use it. And it was weird to see that sort of thing as an SOP, but hey, it works. Because then everybody is quite clear on what a challenge looked like and what to do when you receive one. And actually it's about that, it's that ego suspension. This is not about you, this is not about an ego, there's a bigger thing going on here, and this is how you're actually going to deal with it. And I think there's a lot to be said for that, because it gave people clarity of exactly where those borders were, and it sort of almost, you had something to use to be able to make that challenge. So that I thought was quite a useful way of going about it. The other thing that occurred to me there was what you were talking about, Marius, was very much the just culture of the aviation industry. Exactly the same thing there. If we hide all of the maintenance errors, if somebody's put the wrong screw in a certain thing and something's going to fall off when the plane's in the sky, we need to know about it because we need to understand why it happened. And it isn't about blaming that person. It's about understanding the chain of events that led up to that person doing that thing. So it could well be they're working on shift. The shift patterns aren't very well organised, therefore people are getting fatigue or they're being interrupted during the maintenance process. So therefore it's easier to make mistakes. What is it in the organisation that made that happen? And it's called triple loop learning. So it's not just about learning from the error and how to stop that. It's learning about what systems within the organisation enable that error to occur in the first place. And I think, I mean, all of this would be ripe for use in cybersecurity because it's exactly the same thing. But then aviation aircraft have been around for a long time. Relatively speaking, cybersecurity is new. So I think there is an awful lot to learn from very established sectors that are used to working high pressure, high stakes, let's start bringing some of those things through, because this is not reinvent the wheel time.
Yeah. I always talk about learnings from aviation in cybersecurity, because the one thing which we currently doing a lot of in cybersecurity, we're doing a lot of firefighting. So we're buying tools to solve more incidents, to solve more misconfigurations, more vulnerabilities. But actually, the goal is to understand why they happen in the first place and prevent them from happening in the future. Because currently the backlog is growing, and if you're not hacking away at the backlog, you just trying to solve more. And I always say, give this analogy, as you just mentioned about the screw. When the plane lands and there's 3 screws missing, we don't just replace the screws and send the plane on. We will try to understand why these screws went missing. But in cybersecurity, we just replace the screws and send the plane on.
Yeah,
and that's not the way to go.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff. There's Reason's cheese model, and I always love it because it involves cheese, and anything to do with cheese is great as far as I'm concerned. But what he did, he had a model of accident causation, which is very, very prevalent in aviation. And he likened it to a number of slices of Emmental cheese all lined up. And an accident happens when all the holes line up through the barriers, and then that's what causes an accident. And the idea is to go and look at the barriers, i.e. the cheese slices, and see how those holes line up, and actually realise that for whatever thing that happens at the sharp end, there will always be 3 or 4 layers behind it that enabled that thing to get to the sharp end in the first place. And I think that, it'd be great to see more of this stuff used around cybersecurity. And I think that kind of takes me on a bit to one thing off my wish list, which is that there is an air accident investigation branch, there is a marine accident investigation branch, and they log all of the incidents in a certain way so you fully understand all of the things that happened leading up to that. Is there not a case for something like that in cybersecurity? So at least those lessons are being learned instead of lessons identified, shoved into a folder and never spoken about again, because we're so busy moving forward for the next shiny thing that we're not even thinking about what went wrong before.
And I think that has been one of the most significant problems with cybersecurity in commercial business, in all honesty, for a long time now. Because as Marius and Oliver has said many, many times, we just don't have the authority. We're not given any authority. We're just kind of that sacrificial goat that's just there, just in case something terrible happens. I mean, I totally agree. I mean, the way I run the way I run Razorthorpe, any one of my members of staff can come to me and tell me there's a problem, and they won't get lambasted for it. Any one of my members of staff can turn up to me and say, hi, I think you've handled that wrongly, and kind of take me to task on something I may have said or done or whatever. I'm human. I fuck up like everybody. Probably should bleep that one out. But, I screw up like anybody else does. But we can't fix the problem and as Marius pointed out earlier on, if people are trying to hide it because they're fearful that they're going to get fired, or they're fearful that someone's going to react badly. I find, and again, I'm opening this one up, and this is where we come into the more kind of current world kind of situation and attitudes towards cybersecurity. I am getting very, very sick and tired of having to justify protecting an organization from, in essence, itself and its own ignorance. The amount of ego that you get in commercial business, and we've discussed, and there's been plenty of studies about how many CEOs are complete psychopaths and how many people in the C-suite are completely belligerent. And then you've got middle management who quite often put massive barriers in place to getting procedures to work and done. And then you've got the new people who make mistakes because, they're new, and then you get the older people who've been working there for many, many years who don't want to change, even if there needs to be a change because that's the way they're used to working. Being in cybersecurity is extremely difficult. We have to be adaptable. We have to be accountable. We have to be able to ask questions. We have to be able to feel that we're going to get the right answer. And over the years, I've gotten something simple. Here's an example. I've gotten sick and tired of going into project groups where, say, it's software development. Let's just use that as an example, where you turn up and you say, right, okay, so you've been developing this for a couple of weeks now. What security provisions are you thinking about putting in place for when this goes live? And you stare out at the table and everybody looks at you with blank, lidless eyes. If their eyes could go black, they would do. And you get nothing. And they say, has anyone even thought about pen testing this? Project managers saying, oh, but the budget, it's got to go live like in 3 weeks' time. And we've been talking about DevSecOps being important for quite a while. And for a while it got important, and then it's been pushed by the wayside. And I just get the feeling that at the moment, cybersecurity is in this weird place. We're getting more and more attacks, but it's getting more and more difficult to get budget out of people because I think there's a lot less budget to go round. And I think sometimes cybersecurity people need to remember that as well. I don't know, what attitudes are you guys finding from management and staff in general when it comes to dealing with either companies you deal with or companies you're looking after or companies you're associated with? Are you seeing a lot of belligerence towards security, or is it same old, yeah, okay?
Well, I see, security is always disguised as the number one important thing, but that doesn't always mean the actions follow the words. And I think that's where the problem is. And I think the problem is that we are in this weird world where we have AI race to the bottom, where everyone's running towards AI without having a clue why they need it for, but that's the headlines. And the problem is that sometimes, business leaders are influenced by headlines, and the problem is that if you're changing direction every other week, it's hard to keep up when you're trying to secure a different thing every other week, or trying to advise and guide. And I don't know what needs to change, because sometimes I know people are often pointing to regulation as the way to enforce people's hands. But I think we just need more education and better understanding. And the problem is, I think, business leaders don't necessarily need to understand or want to understand technology, but it's about, I guess, better ways of communicating and translating the inevitable things that's going to happen if we're not going to invest in cybersecurity. And it's not about, I think we often talk too much about prevention rather than resilience. So bad things happen, and sometimes, yes, it can be inevitable, but how we, reduce the impact of bad things happening and how we maintain business operations while bad things are happening. Because, latest things like Cloudflare, already went down twice in the last couple of weeks. And I think, sometimes people rely too much on companies like Cloudflare to keep them alive. Now, the question then becomes, and I posted the video the other day, is like, people even use Cloudflare as WAF. Now, when Cloudflare went down for 8 hours, organizations bypassed Cloudflare. And then it exposed the lack of, security controls. As SQL injection attacks went on, bot attacks went on, and they relied on those being stopped by Cloudflare. Now, if you bypass Cloudflare in case of outage, and you remove those practices from your cybersecurity program, all of a sudden, bad things start happening.
The sad reality is that for 99% of security people, they're not fixing planes. People don't die if you get breached. It's a business problem like shoplifting. I think people need to stop over-identifying with security as the most important thing in the world, because it's not. I think companies treat it differently in a breach because it's public. If you had to register every time somebody steals something in your shop, they might deal differently with it. But in terms of damage, most people's data has been stolen 1 million times. The world has not ended. The sky has not fallen. Businesses are catching on to that. And for them, there's no extra value out of spending more on security. There's no ROI. People won't pay them more if there's not more profit in it. And we have to be careful about how much we advocate spending on something like that, because we're robbing Peter to pay Paul. It has to come from somewhere else. So I think part of this is to do with the fact that a lot of security people feel it's a calling, and they think they have to achieve perfect security, but they don't. Shoplifting isn't a 100% thing. They spend $1 to prevent $12 of shoplifting. That's the ratio. I think in most cases for us, it's an economics problem for business, and we need to get behind that. It's an economics problem. And I think part of that will help with the burnout. But the burnout isn't because people are facing nation states. It's because they're dealing with false positives and alert fatigue and more benign stuff, firewall changes, password changes. I think it's that repetitive and bad ergonomics in the workflows that actually cause a lot of the alert fatigue. We haven't even spoken about ergonomics in security operations workflows, healthy ways of doing workflows. I think there's a lot to be done just on that end as well, in educating users on how to work healthier and better, and also on how to compartmentalize it a bit better.
I think that's a really interesting point you just brought up there about workflows. I've been doing a piece of research on the sort of skills that people need to deal with crisis response. And I've spoken to a number of security team CISOs. And one message that's been surprising for me coming out of it was actually that it isn't necessarily the big incidents that cause the burnout and the stress. It's the constant daily grind of all of these other things that possibly puts more load, cognitive load, onto people. And by cognitive load, what I mean is the amount of work that your brain can physically deal with at any one particular time. It's a limited capacity information process, and there are limits to how much you can process. And it's quite interesting to me to listen to this, because one of the things that I used to do when I worked at university was to teach flight deck design. Now, I've never flown a plane, what do I know? But I do know how the brain works. And everything on that flight deck is designed that way for a reason. Whether it's rate information you're looking at or state information, it's designed to cut out error. And I wonder if there's anything that's ever been done with bringing dashboards together and look at it from a cognitive perspective. Actually, what is the best design to make sure that you only pick up on things you need to? So, for example, on a jet, and you've seen pictures of cockpits, and there are 1,001 dials and it looks ultra confusing. It's actually really very simple because of the way it's compartmentalized. And what they do is, if you have 4 dials, say, in a row that you have to look at, and each of those ones, the correct setting might be a different number, but what they do is they just turn the dials around. So to do a quick check to see if it's all correct, as long as all the arrows are pointing upwards, you need to look at the figures. If one of those things is pointing slightly, 11 o'clock or 2 o'clock, then it draws your attention, and therefore you need to go and deal with it. And I just wonder if there's anything that's ever been done in looking at display and design principles for dashboards, because if you can cut down on that cognitive load, then all of a sudden you're going to make a huge difference to people's daily lives.
Little, because I think the problem is that we don't actually have an evolution in security tools. We build a tool for a specific attack surface. When a new attack surface comes out and we start building new tools, we never have a stable state. And I think that's a maturity thing. But alert fatigue, really the definition in the medical case is that you keep treating the same wound so often that you don't notice if something else comes in. And going back to using AI, for example, in phishing or in simulations, you're dealing with 2,000 calls a year. One of those might be malicious, but you have to be aware every time. You have to have a constant state of alertness. That is quite unrealistic. It's especially outside of a military or outside of a law enforcement environment. We're in a corporate environment where we have meetings and so on. And the reality is that if you put friction in the place of executives or the business, that's worse perceived when it's a false positive. Most of what we deal with are false positive. Crying wolf is something which it's an occupational hazard. And you have to condition yourself to not fall for that. And that is definitely draining. So as an industry, when I ran SOCs, we would rotate people. We would have them doing threat intelligence one week, doing the actual incident response one week, and so on, so that they wouldn't really just be their entire life just looking at tickets. And so you can do things to structure the workflow and the day-to-day a little bit better, more ergonomic, but it takes management buy-in. Ability, which most teams don't have.
Yeah, and also I think that it's, I talk a lot about defence and aviation and, even the blue light services and that, but they're trained for this. Security teams are just expected to be able to work under similar levels of pressure with nothing support-wise, or certainly not that level of guidance that you get if other people have to work under similar pressures.
I've joked with Jim, I don't know anywhere else where they let engineers loose on professional criminals or spies.
Yeah. Yeah, because all of a sudden everybody's on the front line, aren't they? But they never used to be. I mean, nobody really thinks of, I don't know, Tesco being on the front line of attacks and that sort of thing, but they are. So I think there's a whole gap there.
I mean, moving from where we are at the moment and the woes that we have, what do we want for like 2026? What do we want? What do we think's going to happen? What do we, have we got any outlooks? If the ghost of cybersecurity future was to come and appear beside me right now, what do you think he or she or it rather would say?
I mean, I have one prediction. I think cybersecurity salaries are going to go up considerably by the end of next year.
That's a good news.
We follow that with junior pipeline because of premature AI deployment. I think that's going to basically come back to bite companies because there's going to be a shortage of people next year.
Oh, Marius.
Yeah, I have a similar thing, which I keep talking about to people. I think, I saw a post there that sums up, I think, where we currently are. So the post said, 2026, AI is going to build 50% of the code. 2027, 100% of the code is going to be built by AI. 2028, we're going to hire the fired devs to fix the crap AI code. And I think that's where we're heading, because as I said before, I think, the race to the bottom with AI is people want AI, but they don't have developed use cases understanding as well as understanding ROI. The latest report says out of the 300 biggest organizations questioned who are building their own AI, only 5% of them reached productions. They're just running constant pilots without understanding what they need it for and the cost implications, how much it costs to run it.
But Marius, you have a very strong opinion on the state of AI, but if you're a business person, there's uncertainty. Are you going to hire up a team, which you might have to fire in 6 months because you have an AI jump? That uncertainty is holding people back from hiring because they don't really know what they're hiring for. Yeah. I think so. It's not always a moral failing. Sometimes it's just uncertainty. It's just people not being sure. We all have very strong opinions on where the technology is and where it's going. I think if you're a layperson, it's not that straightforward. They're being told different things by different people and they have to hedge their bet.
No, I perfectly understand that. But that's what I'm saying is that the race towards AI is we want AI, but we don't know what we want it for. And then there needs to be a path to arrive to a decision of why you want it before you jump in it.
Yeah, but I do have to say there are some green shoots with using AI in cybersecurity. I have to say there are some low-hanging fruit. There's stuff where it's helping, but
log analysis.
It's the expectation versus the reality that's a problem. The gap there, and people are hoping it's going to be closed very soon. But what if it's not? Right?
It's interesting actually. I saw it's along this lines, but it's in a different industry. I was watching a podcast the other day, and there's a serious concern over in the States who have, obviously, they've got lots and lots of lawyers out there. They like lawyers, or we call them solicitors or whatever you want to call them. There's lots of senior lawyers out there, senior solicitors and all the rest of it. But there's a real big concern in their industry because they're not recruiting fresh lawyers who are just out or coming out university in our case, or college in their case, because originally what those junior kind of lawyers would do is they would spend time doing analysis on cases and so on and so forth. And firms have now been sold this whole kind of, well, AI can do it better than your junior lawyers could, and for cheaper, because obviously you don't have to employ people. So the business owners have gone, cool. It sounds like that would make things a hell of a lot cheaper at that end of the stack. So they've not been employing them, and they've been sort of like diddling around with various different AI models to make it work. And then apparently a couple of the more intelligent lawyers out there, I'm not saying lawyers aren't intelligent, I love you lawyers, but don't sue me. A group of them turned around and said, well, where do you think we get senior lawyers from? The fact that you're not employing these entry-level lawyer jobs means that when we retire eventually, you're not going to have any lawyers because you've replaced the entire section of where we get our new lawyers from with artificial intelligence. So you've got a whole generation of people who've gone through college, in their case, with massive college debts at the end of it, being sold the lie of like, you know, you can get a great job at the end of it, and there's nothing there. And I think we're probably going to experience something similar with security, because let's face it, your first job in InfoSec is normally the stuff that the people who've been doing it for a while don't want to do. It's the analysis. I mean, God, the thought of going back to my 30 years youth, where I would be sitting there looking at firewall logs to find exactly roughly what was going on over a week's worth of log review work. Or even more recently, PCI DSS having to go through a set of logs to find out whether or not the logging is working, you know, so I can sign off requirement 10. And the idea of being able to utilize something to do that for me is fantastic. Problem is somebody won't be doing it, so they won't be learning how to do that. Won't be learning how to do the data analysis element of the work that we do. And we're eventually going to have a whole senior set of cybersecurity people who are leaving the industry with nobody to replace them, because everybody thought they could replace the bottom end stuff with AI. Or am I talking crap?
No. I think that's already playing out in SOC, because most organizations, and especially I had on my podcast chief innovation officer for one of the MSSPs. They're not hiring tier 1 SOC analysts. That's all been done by AI. So now all of these juniors who are training to enter, all of a sudden, the sort of entry level bridge becoming higher, because they're not hiring those junior people to learn the SOC inside out. Which, on one side, I understand AI is great at eliminating sort of, the mundane, the burnout tasks where you're trying to solve hundreds of incidents per day. That's great in that sense of it's helping to remove that burnout, stage of the work. But secondly, as you say, it's no longer producing those junior analysts who will become seniors.
Even Bec, the younger generation, do you have concerns for them in general because of everything going on? I mean, we're talking from a cybersecurity standpoint, but I'm sure you guys like to read kind of some of the analysis of what's going on with your peers and what have you around stress, work, that kind of stuff. Are you seeing that the younger generation are suffering a hell of a lot more? Because, I mean, I look at my generation, speak to people in my kind of level of career, and I'm seeing more stress than I know what to consider. But we've got jobs at the moment anyway. Don't know how much longer we're going to have them. But the younger generation, there's a real serious dip in hiring that I've seen in the stats, both in the States over in the UK. Are you seeing, like, obviously there's a generational difference as well. I'm Gen X, the latchkey kid, spent most of his time not seeing his parents and letting himself in at home and cooking his own dinner, considering that. But are you seeing that there's a serious problem? And we're talking cybersecurity, but obviously you guys have dealt with other industries as well. Is it a serious concern that AI is taking over that these people have got no hope of getting into a job and progressing through a job and having the life that they're seeing the rest of us having at the moment?
The thought of me speaking for the younger generation.
I thought you were 23.
Oh no. So there's certainly something about a sense of hopefulness and a sense of agency, right? So if we think about hopefulness, the technical definition of hope is optimism plus agency. Tomorrow can be better than today, and I can make it so, right? If, to your point of, and these are huge generalizations, right? But do they look at the kind of Gen X lifestyle and think, oh, home ownership, that's a possibility for me. Some way into an industry that looks stable enough to sustain me. Maybe not. Maybe there are barriers to entry. Maybe they won't put up with as much nonsense in a workplace as our generation might have.
I think it's an interesting one because we're looking at it from our perspective, not their perspective, because we can't understand that perspective. I certainly can't. I'm too far away from it. But also, I think that there's a whole cultural shift going on that's going to take years. And those entry-level jobs might not be available, but work will look different. Think back to Industrial Revolution. Are we going through something similar with the way that AI is now, that actually there will be a shift? So, when people stopped weaving blankets by hand because machine looms came in, obviously big differences there, but the principles underpinning that, are they the same? Is it going to be that in 40, 50 years' time, the whole thing about work will have changed? And is it going to be beyond something that we could even begin to recognise? Is it so tragic and such a problem, or is this part of progress? I think is probably where I'm going with that one.
Right. And turning the question round and building on that, and perhaps going back to something Oliver said, one of your questions which was left open earlier on about what does the individual do about burnout. If we are to say we can't change any of the externals and all we can do is change the internal, and if I'm noticing that some of the younger generation won't put up with some of the nonsense in the workplace, like some of the bullying, harassment and discrimination, for example, that there's more openness around early stage mental health issues, like early stage anxiety, for example, I'm going to lighten the tone for a minute with this example, right? So we're going to lighten the tone and we're going to say, think of a cuddly baby animal that just you want to go, or anything close to that. Jim, it might not apply to you, but if everyone else likes puppies or kittens or something that just makes you a little soft inside.
Oh, a little soft. I thought you meant squish them.
Not the gentle kind of squish. All right, we're going to go ahead with this, right? So you wake up in the morning, there's a knock at the door, and there's a puppy at the door, and you look around and there's no human there, and you're like, well, I kind of like puppies. I'm going to take this puppy in. I can look after a puppy. All right, it's me and the puppy. Next morning, knock at the door. You open the door. 2 puppies. You're like, right. Taking the 2 puppies. Now you have 3 puppies, which is okay enough, but when you've got one in each hand, there's still one running around making mischief. Okay, but you can still just about deal with 3 puppies. Next morning, knock at the door. 5 more puppies. Right, so now you have 8 puppies. Now you have chaos. Now, I won't keep this going, but at some point, you have to decide, because I care about puppies, I can't care about more puppies, right? So this is a soft way of saying, I have to decide for myself what is enough, when I have given enough. If the workplace or if culture is saying, or if InfoSec in general is saying, you must care about all of this, you must feel responsible about all of this, and you know that it is not possible for you, but you can care about this much. Rationalize with yourself, all right, this is what I can do, and this is what I'm going to do well. Right? So you put your own limits in there. Right? So that's one example that I think the younger generation can teach us about. There's only so much you can do. I don't know, does that land with anyone else? I'm seeing a nod and 3 blank faces.
Yeah, it certainly landed with me.
Marius, you get involved a lot with kind of like trying to teach the youngsters. Oh God.
Yeah.
Oh God.
I'll give you a simple example that I often share, and I think sometimes, as you kind of said, I think we are ourselves to blame when in some ways. But I'll give this example. Now, when you start a new job, you normally are eager to impress people, and all of a sudden, you answer an email at 11 p.m. You answer a call at midnight, but this sets an expectation. And all of a sudden, you are always answering emails at 11 p.m. because you are expected to, because that's where you started at. Mm-hmm. And I always say to people, sometimes you have to be very conscious about how and when you want to impress people when you start a new role, because you don't want to set an unprecedented expectation that you can't keep up with, or it's going to lead to more stress than you can take on.
I think that's very true. Boundaries is good. We're not always great at setting them. I had a conversation with somebody who is 25-ish years younger than me about stress in the workplace and things. And I had a a moment of enlightenment over workplace stress, probably only a couple of months ago, which is disgraceful for my age, that actually my way of seeing the world is that work is everything, and things, whether it's family, exercise, friends, all of that fits in around work. And I had a dawning realisation that if I flip the script and work fits in around that, then maybe life would be less stressful and I'd be more relaxed. And this was sort of a massive light bulb moment for me, which as a psychologist, a bit embarrassing really. But the person that I was talking to was sort of 25 odd years younger, saying, but really? Oh no, that's how I think. That's all my friends think. It's all, work is secondary to everything else. So I think there are shifts in generational thinking. And as you say, I think people will put up with less crap in the workplace and have that different attitude. But to me, it was, how is that even a thing? It's all of a sudden I realised what breathing was or something strange like that. It was to her, very matter of fact. To me, it was a massive revelation. And I think that, again, it's that shift in the way that we see the world, and that actually are the younger generation who are not getting what we think they need, actually probably getting everything they need and possibly more, because they're framed things differently.
I think, we're all here talking about final thoughts, really. And I think we're in a major technological shift. We're in a major societal shift, and attitudes are changing very dramatically between the youngsters and the generation, where we're at. I think there's massive economic shifts. We've got a lot of problems in the world as well in general. And more security events are happening all across the world faster. I mean, we had in quick succession, we had the M&S, the Harrods, Co-op, and several others as well. And none of us really know where we're going. And it doesn't help when, you've got a younger generation who are wondering whether they're going to own their own home, or whether they're going to follow what the wonderful World Economic Forum is. Not that I'm criticizing them, but when you send out a message of you will own nothing and you will be happy, you have to question what the kind of motive is there behind that, because people do want to own stuff and they want to be happy. But when you're kind of, being told what you're going to be doing, and then you have the worry, the younger generation have we don't. Is AI, am I going to get into a job because of AI? Or am I going to wind up on the shelf? I've studied for years and years and years doing something only to find that there's no job at the end of it. Was it difficult for me to get into cybersecurity 30 years ago? Yeah, of course it was. Christ, it was terrible. It was hard to get into IT. You get your first job, it was tough. Once you got your first job and you did your first 5 years, everything got immeasurably easier. But it was tough to get in. But what I'm seeing at the moment from what I'm seeing from a lot of young people, and they are very vocal, there's a lot of attention seekers on that you see nowadays compared to when I was a lot younger, because there's a lot more social media areas where you can go and see that stuff. But I think the general message is there's some serious concern with the youngsters about how they're going to have a career and even progress it, because their fear is that, AI is going to not even give them the option. Then you've got business owners who are like, well, let's go all AI. Well, they're not even securing half of these environments. And, you're seeing AI companies pop up all over the place, and none of them are doing security any particularly good way, because they're fighting to be sort of like the first to develop AI agents or whatever the hell it is AI associated they're doing. So they're not spending on staff. So, there's less money to go around. A lot of money seems to be filtering very quickly towards the top. It has been over COVID, whether you believe sort of like the conspiracy theories or not. I'm actually genuinely concerned that societally, from a security standpoint, we're just ignoring it. We're just going back to a point where it's just like, yeah, it's important if it becomes a problem, so we're going to have more events. I'm worried whether or not in about 10 years' time, we're going to have the next generation of InfoSec people who are at mine and Marius's and Oliver's kind of stage, because you're not going to have the youngsters. They're not going to have gotten in. I mean, Christ, we're going to have AI lawyers, no doubt, in 20 years' time. Let's be honest. I mean, Oliver might not agree with that. We've had a lot of disagreements about the state of AI, but people are using them as therapists. People are considering themselves having relationships with AI at the moment, which is scary in the extreme.
There's a breach that I'm waiting to happen. And yes, so predictions for next year. I'm sure you're all aware that there are various kind of apps which are not suitable for work apps, where the user can set the age that they want the app to be chatting with them.
What?
Yeah. Oh, you didn't? Okay, so yeah. Now,
bear in mind this is going on YouTube, so let's be really careful if we're going.
So careful. So there are meant to be provisos like, we have content moderators. There won't be anything terribly untoward. But some of the staff who've left say, no, there's no content moderation. And the thing is, they report that the users are using their real names and identifiable email addresses connected to these kind of chat histories, right? Which is mind-boggling. I'm waiting for those chat histories to be used to blackmail people. So in terms of like insider threats, that's an easy way in. But I'm also waiting for those chat histories to be released and for people within teams, security teams, to have the dilemma of this person I've been sat next to for the last 18 months or 18 years, who I've trusted, who I might have, spent time with, brought to my home when my kids were right? What is it going to do to team cohesion?
Cohesion in general.
Cohesion in general, but I'm just framing it for the conversation here. So that's a breach I'm waiting to hear about. Anyone else really waiting and surprised that something hasn't happened? Of course, it may already have happened. I just haven't heard about it as a civilian.
I'm seeing the effects of that in the courtroom.
Interesting.
In the court.
That's all I'll say for current audience.
Okay.
But yeah, it's
a podcast for a later time when obviously that's been done then. But I mean, our time is coming to an end. I know you guys are all very, very busy. Thank you for coming along to our little Christmas party. Obviously, we've got at least one person wearing, a T-shirt of Christmas descent and baubles. I myself have nothing, along with Marius, unless he's got his socks on. You don't happen to have Christmas socks on, do you, Marius?
I have socks from merely a post from Fortinet that says WTF. But I have red on them. It's Christmas.
It's been absolutely fantastic sitting down and just having a bit of a chat about you. Obviously, we're going to a new year next year. So, Merry Christmas to everybody out there. Have a fantastic New Year, and Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. That's what I was about to say. There you go. To all of you guys too, and we'll be hopefully seeing a lot more of you guys next year. We'll cover some of the points, no doubt, that we pointed out here. Would be good to have a chat about. Any final words to say before the end? Yes,
for therapist homework, gravity needs levity, right? So if you're going to do something over Christmas, then you need some laughing. You need to be listening to your favorite comedian's podcast, your comedy Netflix series, spend time with that mate who's got the really contagious laugh. Do that. Do that before you start on next year.
Yeah, have a proper break.
I'll just say Merry Christmas to all the hackers. Good time. Enjoy the holidays and let security professionals enjoy them too.
Please don't do any major breaches over the Christmas period.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but may you have a quiet Christmas.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for sitting and watching us. And thank you to all our guests and what have you. You look after yourselves. Have a great end of year, and please, sit down, relax, chill out. And for all those malicious actors out there, why don't you do the same thing? Sit down, chill out, have a beer. Let's all just have a nice, quiet one. And then we can go into 2026 with reckless abandon and do what we all need to do. But from myself and to everybody out there, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Look after yourselves, look after your families, spend some time, and we'll be seeing you again very, very soon. Goodbye.